Man, I love Shovel Knight. And honestly, who wouldn't? With the game's super tight, super simplistic control scheme, nostalgia-centric but still unique gameplay, and a dark underlying story that's basically an allegory for addiction. There's basically something here for everyone. Hello, familiar-sounding voiceover. I'm Mild Kratz, and unless you're a very small part of the internet, you probably have no idea who I am. Anyway, I was trying to follow along with what you were saying there about the game. I love Shovel Knight. I've been playing through it for a while now. I've definitely seen some of those things like the tight controls you're talking about, nostalgia-centric gameplay, but I think you said something then about addiction?
I did.
Yeah, so I think this game has a darker theme underlying a lot of the stuff that's going on, and I'd like to dig into some of that today. Pardon the pun. Is there a more inspiring and triumphant game than Shovel Knight? Probably, but I'm not actually asking for your opinion. The game plays on themes of heroism, defending the downtrodden, becoming stronger and more skilled, and defeating evil in every possible corner it may be hiding, albeit in the sky above or the ground below. But I don't think Mole Knight is the only thing hiding under the crust of this game. I think perhaps at the most basic, cursory analytical look at this game, you might suffice to call it a return to form, as some others may put it, a renaissance. But if that's where you stopped, you're barely scraping the surface. Not that I'm trying to start some kind of YouTube beef. Hey, what's this weird evergreen tree that just popped up on the screen? That seems kind of random. Calling this game an homage to older video games is basically remarking on how the sky is blue. While it might be true, it's hardly worth remarking upon. It's certainly not worth making a 13.5-minute video about, especially if the other thing you're trying to say is that the game's story is simple. I might instead argue that you're missing the point and that you are simple. But I suppose if I'm going to make those kinds of claims, I should probably offer up some kind of evidence. What is it I'm really suggesting, though? I mean, you read the thumbnail, I presume. It is my wholehearted belief that Shield Knight is actually a character who parallels addiction and is arguably the central focus of this story. In order to do this, however, we'll have to take a look at two different characters. Or are they two different characters? Without having anything to admittedly, finitely combine these two characters into one, it has always been my belief that Shovel Knight and Black Knight are two sides of the same coin. It was always my feeling that Yacht Club wanted us to draw this association, because every player, even under the most basic examination, will notice a few things between the two. Firstly and foremostly are the almost mirror-like qualities of their armor, and their appearance at large. I mean, basically, these two are twinsies. Where Shovel Knight's armor is sometimes more rounded, Black Knight's armor is a bit more aggressive and pointy. Shovel Knight takes on more of a royal cerulean color scheme, as Black Knight will say, whereas Black Knight is, as no surprise, black. These small differences aside, the characters are basically the same character. Now, this could just be an aesthetic thing, drawing parallels to something like Dark Link, but that's actually an interesting parallel too. My first run-in with Dark Link was in the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time. If memory serves, you fight him in kind of a small, circular-ish room that bears an odd resemblance to a reflecting pond. But if you're just here to fight Dark Link, what is it you're really reflecting upon? It's odd details like this, and the fact that the character looks exactly like you, has everything you have, and basically mirrors all of your movements, which leads me to believe that Dark Link is really just a darker manifestation of yourself. It's also similar to the scene in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke goes into a cave to fight Darth Vader, only to cut his head off and find out it's really himself inside. But I'm sure there are countless other examples of facing the darkness within you, using a character who parallels you, except with a splash of dark paint and a dash of menacing charm. And whether or not Black Knight is your literal parallel, or whether or not you stem from the same DNA, the character serves the same purpose in my belief. No matter the form he takes in Shovel Knight mythology, he definitely serves as the duality of Shovel Knight's character. But my interpretation of that meaning is probably a little bit different. I think the inherent truth behind these two characters is that they are ideologically more similar than they are even cosmetically. Neither of them really seems to care about the Order of No Quarter, other than the fact they're in the way of their goals. Neither of them truthfully really care about the townspeople. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, Shovel Knight does a lot of really good things for the townspeople. I'm not arguing that he doesn't. But he's also not a mute character. In the common instances in which he's being addressed, he does often return dialogue of his own. and providing that circumstance, he really only talks to people who are in the way of him getting to the tower. I don't think that Shovel Knight is displeased about what happens with the town people, but it's also not his primary focus. Bearing all of this in mind, the only truly distinct opinion that Shovel Knight has over Black Knight is his opinion on the Enchantress. Oh, by the way, this is where I'm about to go into deep spoiler territory, so if in the 3 years this game has been out you haven't played it yet or haven't heard the story, you might want to go find a different video real quick. Here's where I think things really start to break down, and this story really becomes an allegory for addiction, and an examination of these 4 characters: Shovel Knight, Shield Knight, Black Knight, and the Enchantress. It is alluded to later in the game that both Shovel Knight and Black Knight know the true identity of the Enchantress, and I'm guessing almost all of you do too. But if you don't, here's the big major spoiler here. The Enchantress is actually Shield Knight. If you're a clever little boy or girl, I'm sure this doesn't come as much of a surprise at the end of the game, but I'm sure a lot of you also probably didn't know in advance of the Black Knight telling you this, even if you may have had your suspicions. So using this information to review these 2 characters, you can finally see the primary difference between the 2. Black Knight is so afraid of losing Shield Knight, he's willing to defend the Enchantress, forbidding anything happen to her should it happen to the Enchantress. Shovel Knight's love for Shield Knight, however, is a little bit truer, and he doesn't find the Enchantress to be a suitable substitution of that love. In this way, these 2 characters represent the 2 different sides of loving an addict. Black Knight guards the Enchantress and her evil intentions, most likely because he's afraid that if he doesn't, she won't want anything to do with him. Those who know anything about addiction know that this is a kind of enabling behavior. The Black Knight defends everything the Enchantress does, because maybe he can't see the difference between the woman he once loved and the power controlling her. Interestingly, the Black Knight's song on the official soundtrack are The Rival and The Defender. This promotes the idea of a kinship between himself and Shovel Knight, and the concept that he's defending the Enchantress, despite probably not seeing her point of view. Shovel Knight, on the other hand, is the embodiment of hope, probably hence his campaign name, Shovel of Hope. Within his pointy horned helm lies the realization that Shield Knight is probably forever lost to the Enchantress, and so I believe his quest is to definitively prove that hypothesis, always with the hope that he's in fact wrong, despite knowing he's almost certainly right. And what about the Enchantress herself? She certainly seems to think she's a god in her own right, and never stops to question the morality of the things she's doing. And on top of that, she has been known to, on more than one occasion, grant people a taste of her immense power. I think all of these things speak to a person who is in active addiction. Addiction is basically a disease, or in terms of a parallel, something of a curse, which would cause someone to believe they're the master of their own universe. Unfortunately for the addict, and in this case the Enchantress, it's almost impossible to find someone who shares that perspective. So it often becomes the thought process that it might be easier to convert someone to your way of thinking. In the addict's mind, as well as the Enchantress, I'm sure, there is nothing she can't do. So she may as well convert the Black Knight to her manner of thinking. The unfortunate real-world parallel to offering someone a taste of power can many times be trying to drag someone else down into your addiction. I think the addiction metaphor also corresponds to the reason she forms the Order of No Quarter. In many 12-step programs, addicts often refer to addiction as cunning, baffling, and powerful. That's basically the definition of who the Enchantress is. It is usually by employing one of these 3 qualities that she most commonly traps any of the members of the Order of No Quarter into backing her side. Through some added context given by Plague of Shadows and Spectre of Torment, we come to see that most of the Knights of the Order of No Quarter aren't actually that bad. Many of them are being preyed upon by their weaknesses, their circumstances, or the promise of money or power. If there's one thing that addiction does well, it's appealing to these insecurities, making the Enchantress's greatest power perhaps her power of persuasion. So if the Enchantress is the affliction of our addiction, that makes Shield Knight our victim. And she is just that, unfortunately, as are most addicts in the real-world parallel. We get to witness Shield Knight's fall from grace in the newest expansion to the game, Spectre of Torment. Although it's alluded to in Shovel of Hope, the scene with Donovan, Luan, and Shield Knight provides a lot of the missing framework for Shield Knight's descent. This short scene also demonstrates a few important things. In this scene, Shield Knight is the one warning Donovan from using the amulet. This may seem a mundane detail, however it tells me that she realizes the power as well as the negative influence of the amulet. She also knows that whatever power the amulet could provide her, it's not worth having. But unfortunately, in the end, she almost certainly has to rely upon this power in order to save herself. For many addicts, their drug of choice started as a logical solution to their problem, and perhaps for a time it was. But unfortunately, in many cases, the addiction takes over, and the parts of the person that were recognizably human start to fade away. Shield Knight's story is unfortunately no different, and in time she is lost to the Enchantress. So if this game is so particularly dark and brooding, why is it washed over with such a happy ending? Well, let's suppose for a second you're not already mad at me. What I'm proposing next will probably push you over the edge. At the end of the game, after Shovel Knight beats the first form of the Enchantress, Shield Knight manages to break free, and the two long-lost, presumable lovers are granted a moment of victory in a long overdue embrace. Shield Knight seems surprised that Shovel Knight would have gone through all the trouble. Shovel Knight assures her that he would have done it sooner had he known, and also promises that he would never give up on her. But then we begin a fight against just the power of the amulet, or, in its real-life parallel, Shield Knight's addiction. Even if you win in this battle, you still lose. Shovel Knight is cast to the ground, and Shield Knight is left to fight the addiction herself. This again, I believe, corresponds to a real-world parallel. People who know addiction well, and who love an addict, know how easy it is to want to fight their addiction for them. But the truth is, you can't. The only person who can beat their own addiction and face their inner demons are the addicts themselves. It is for this reason I'm led to believe that Shield Knight is left here to fight her inner demons herself. At some point, Black Knight wanders into the scene, and Shield Knight pleads with him to carry Shovel Knight off to safety, and believing this is the end for herself, tells Black Knight that she was happy to see them both one last time. In the final scene before credits roll, Black Knight carries Shovel Knight to a familiar campground where he leans him against a log. Shovel Knight sits against the log completely unconscious, and the screen fades to black. Credits roll, stats are given, and then after the credits is an important scene. But I think it's left better open to interpretation than people want to believe. Shield Knight comes stumbling into view, shuffles over towards Shovel Knight, and lays her head on his shoulder. The camera pans up to the stars, and we see the words, "The End." But in my mind, it begs an important question. Why the cut at the campfire scene between the beginning and end of the credits? People who've played the game realize the significance of the campfire. It's the place that Shovel Knight comes to sleep every night, and it is here that he often dreams about Shield Knight. Most commonly, he dreams about catching her. Sometimes he dreams about fighting some enemies and then catching her. But the resounding theme is that she's always there. Is it possible that he's just dreaming this as well? If you want to believe the happy ending, go ahead and believe it. I think this is left open to interpretation, however, and I can tell you in my own experience, Shield Knight often doesn't come back. And even if she did, things wouldn't ever be the same. Of course, life is full of silver linings, and at the end of the game a lot of good things still happen. The Tower of Fate is seen crumbling as the villagers all dance in the foreground. We're given even more perspective on the different members of the Order of No Quarter. Either justice is served or people are unbinded from their shackles. It's a bizarre twist of fate to imagine that our shovel-wielding hero should be the only one left unrewarded. So maybe Yacht Club Games, in turn, intended for the game to end in a literal fashion. But even if my version of the story is true, it doesn't necessarily mean the game is any less beautiful. There is beauty in tragedy. There is experience and wisdom to be gained from having lost something dear to you. Whether the end of this game is just a cookie-cutter feel-good experience, or echoes of something a little more haunting, this game captures this full gambit of feelings beautifully. And don't let me ruin this game for you. I mean, really, it's just a theory. A mild theory. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you next time.